Hi, this is Walter Weesey from Yellowstone Country Fly Fishing with my weekly Montana Guide Flies fly tying video. And this is actually a blast from the past. This is a Coachman or Peacock Clacka Caddis, which is one of my first original fly patterns. I've been tying this for 15 or 16 years. And I wanted to revisit this pattern because I tie it slightly differently now, and for one thing. And then another thing is the original video I put up of this color was not high res, high definition, and so it doesn't show up in the algorithm anymore. And so I wanted to get this back out there because it's a good pattern, and on the Yellowstone River, actually, the caddis hatches have come back, roaring back after the floods. The hypothesis is that a lot of those algae and silt and so on that had kind of screwed up life in the gravel for the caddis has gotten washed away, and particularly 2024, we had excellent tan caddis hatches in early July, which we hadn't had for close to 10 years. And there's a lot of other videos of this pattern out there that frankly aren't that good. I mean, people are just tying them wrong, or they're saying that they're using them for certain purposes that I don't use them for, and so on and so forth. And so I wanted to kind of get my name back to the top of the pile there with this. Alright, so the hook in my vise here is a 1X long dry fly hook. This is a Montana Fly Company 7000, size 14, but you know, your TMC 100, etc. is going to be the proper hook. And my thread on this fly is going to be 80 dark brown. And you know, you can tie this in a whole bunch of colors, and this particular version basically is a stand-in for a Coachman Trude. It floats a little lower, but it's buoyant because of the kind of really robust iris caddis type wing. And like I said, Attractor dry fly, you can tie this in imitative colors as well, and honestly the Attractor color is usually as effective as anything else. If you go back a couple years, 5 years, I tied this in pink as well. I tend to fish this in this peacock color and then the pink. But anyhow, I started my thread there at the front of the shank, and then my tail on this fly, or shuck, is just going to be gold. I think this is actually Caddis Amber sparkle emerging yarn, and you could also use gold Zelon. And I'm just going to wrap over that all the way down to the hook bend. And you want a pretty robust chunk of this because it's I actually cut that off pretty short, and so if you tie it kind of scraggly, it doesn't look right. A lot of the commercial versions of this I see, whether I approve of them or not, you know, if it's a company I've worked for or not, or things that other people are tying, don't have the sort of thick tail that I'm tying there. You see, that's a very short shuck. You know, I would easily, or I would consider even doing this in, you know, bright green or red or something, just as an attractor. Here it probably does look a bit like a caddis shuck, or, you know, a merger shuck of a caddis pupa, but I want it robust and short rather than long and scraggly, as you'd usually see, especially on a mayfly pattern. Now my body on this fly is going to be peacock curl, just your basic strung peacock. And you know, if you've got a really nice peacock eye where you've got you know, really long fibers on each of those hurl strands, you could get away with 2 on this size 14. Usually on the 14 I'm going to wind up using 3, assuming I'm using this kind of scraggly, you know, not that great strung stuff. But if you have really good peacock, you could probably get away with 2. And then on the 16 I'd always use a 2, and on the 12 I would almost always use 4 with this, you know, strung stuff. Anyhow, I'm going to wrap up that peacock basically back to that tie-in point, and then I'm actually going to back up again in front of the peacock curl, and you'll see why in a second. The thread hanging there actually helps the peacock stay together as I wrap it. Now, you always have to reinforce peacock curl, and so I'm going to go ahead and lay down a pretty good glob of super glue there on that hook shank, and that's going to be what holds my peacock in place as it starts to get torn up. Then I'm just going to wrap forward, and you see how I'm kind of butting up against that thread. That's going to keep that hurl from separating and make for a nice fuzzy body. And I'm going to wrap back about 2/3 of the way to the eye there. Alright, now my wing on this fly is going to be white widow's web. Again, it's just your basic hot dyed poly yarn. EP fibers are the same thing. Macrame yarn can be the same thing. And you notice here, this is one of the places where I see other people tying this fly, and also where I've had just tons of trouble with commercial companies that I've had tie it. Right now I'm working with Catch for a little while longer. I've worked with MFC, and they would typically tie this with half this much wing, and the pattern wouldn't float. Almost all of your actual flotation in this fly is coming off of this wing. This is a hydrophobic material, and I'm going to create a bubble with it. And so it traps not only fly floating, when you grease the fly, but it also traps air when you false cast it. You're going to false cast, shoot off any water that's on it, and then it holds air, like a bubble. And so this is actually much more important than your hackle as far as flotation on this fly. So you want a pretty good clump of it. And what I'm going to do there is just grab that clump and then fold it like this. And if you get any flyaways like I did there, you can just strip those away. And you see how I've created a loop there. And then again, this is another place where I see this fly tied wrong. I'll see people tie it like this with that loop on top of the fly. I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees. I'm going to tie that loop horizontally over the back of the fly like that. Again, to create that bubble, and also because obviously a caddis has, a broad wing profile rather than a vertical one. All right, so I'm going to go in here. I'm going to hold that with my right hand and just do kind of a loose wrap there to get that situated. And I want that bubble to extend about to the base of the tail or slightly longer. I don't want it down here because it'll actually slide around that hook gape and you'll end up getting tangled. So just kind of just past the end of the body there. Then I'm going to switch hands and then tighten up those wraps, make a couple more. And you can kind of see how I have that material. It's on the top of the hook shank more or less, and then down slightly down the sides, but the bottom is basically clear. And if you get it to where you got too much on the bottom, which I'm kind of right on the borderline there, I would actually back off and then redo it. In fact, I'm going to do that. And I do like the wing to kind of stay together as I'm tying the fly. And then one other note here, as you kind of tighten up on that material while you're making that loop, you can kind of see that one side of the material is actually, I've pulled that loop a little tighter so it's shorter at the top end here. That's the end I want to tie in on top of the hook shank, or on top of the wing clump, just because that's, again, going to give me kind of that tent wing caddis profile. And the basic winging style here is taken from Craig Matthews' Iris Caddis, but this is a very, very different pattern. This is designed to be fished in rough water as an attractor dry versus the Iris Caddis, which is basically a flat water attractor pattern. And so tying technique is the same, but especially the volume of this wing is much, much higher. All right, and then my hackle on this fly is going to be a Coachman Brown saddle, and this is a really old cheap saddle, and it's actually a hairline branded saddle. You see how it's got a little bit of duotone there. That's a-okay with this fly. The more variation the better. And then my hackle sizing here, because I'm going to be wrapping over these wing butts, you actually want to undersize this hackle. This is a size 14 fly, but the hackle is more like a 15, so to speak. And because if you use a size 12, or I'm sorry, a size 14, properly sized hackle, it's going to be way too big. I used the base end of the feather here. Well, I dropped it, but I used the base end of that feather, which it was slightly longer fibers on the sample fly. And actually, the sample fly, the hackle was a little too long. As I said, the hackle doesn't really help much with the overall flotation of this fly. It's helping with the orientation of the fly to kind of help it sit properly. I could probably tie the fly with just a dubbed head here and it would work just fine. All right, anyhow, so I've tried to trim that wing butt. I wrapped over it quite a bit and over the hackle stem. And then I tried to trim the wing butt at a bit of an angle here. I'm going to wrap over that up to the eye. And then I like on this one to wrap my thorax or head from the front to the back and then back forward again to kind of fill in any gaps. Now I usually use chocolate brown eye stub on this pattern. Couldn't find my chocolate brown eye stub, and so I'm using pheasant tail. This is going to be a little flashier than the chocolate brown. And then the head is essentially stimulator style hackle and head, because when I was coming up with the pattern, like I said, I was trying to sub in for a Coachman Trude, which just has a standard forward hackle. And I found that wrapping over this big lump of wing butts here, it was hard to get my hackle even. And so I spread out the hackle slightly, and I palmer wrapped it through dubbing instead of just wrapping a hackle over bare thread. And that allowed me to get the hackle on there and have it not want to slide off the eye of the hook. But anyhow, I'm going to go in again with my super glue and then make sure to get some on that hackle stem to anchor that hackle in. And then while that's still wet, I'm going to wrap back all the way back to the hackle tie-in point. I'm going to take one turn behind the hackle and then back forward to the eye again. And this can be, fairly rough, shaggy like that, because I'm going to be wrapping the hackle through it, and that's what's actually going to create the, in other words, the thorax here or the head is never really going to be in contact with the water. And so if it's a little raggedy and tends to absorb water, that's not going to hurt anything. All right, then I'm going to grab my hackle, and I like to make 4 turns of hackle on this fly. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to tie that off. Trim, and then I'm just going to whip finish over the stem there to tie it off. And since I was kind of making a head there too, I made 5 turns with my whip finish, which is more than I usually make. And then trim that, and you see how that hackle is actually still fairly long, but it's not as long as on the sample fly. Again, you do want to undersize that hackle slightly to fit over that those wing butts and over the thorax. Then my last step here, I'm going to come in and I'm going to take off most of that hackle underneath the hook shank. And you'll hear people talking about a V-notch. This isn't even really a V-notch. It's basically trimmed flat because I want a wide footprint on that fly, so it sits down in the film with the the hackle acts as outriggers, and then the bottom of the fly and that tail are sitting kind of in the surface film. And then my big bushy wing here is actually what creates the flotation. That's what's out of the water. So this is a rough water attractor dry that nonetheless sits flat in the surface film. But anyhow, there it is. That's my Clacka Caddis in the Coachman or Peacock colorway. Certainly tie this in whatever colors you like to match your local caddis, but I suggest trying this one on rough water, especially as your basic attractor fly. I tie this one in sizes 12 through 16. You could probably stretch it down to an 18 without too much trouble. And believe it or not, in those small sizes, it actually looks a bit like a midge cluster. So I tend to fish the 12, and then the 14, and then the 16 as the water gets lower and clearer in the summer. And then don't use it very much in August and early September, maybe even into early October. But then we start using that 16 again as your midge cluster, because that wing will kind of disappear on a gray day, and then you've got a peacock body and kind of that flash from the eye stub, and that sort of looks like a midge cluster, but it's easier to see, of course. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video and find it helpful, I'd appreciate it if you throw $1 into my Buy Me a Coffee tip jar. And then if you're curious about fishing trips in the Yellowstone region, visit my website or give me a call. Thanks.